They said he was just a coffee boy, a nobody, someone who should be grateful just to breathe the same air as the firm's most powerful lawyer. But what no one knew is that this nobody would one day hold the power to destroy that same lawyer's career or save it. And when that day came, he chose revenge. Stick with me until the very end, because this story will make you rethink everything you believe about power, arrogance, and karma. And hey, if you love real-life stories with shocking twists, hit that like button right now. Subscribe, and make sure you watch this one all the way through. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. The revolving glass doors spun slowly as Daniel stepped into the towering skyscraper that housed Graves and Cole, one of the most prestigious law firms in the city. His heart pounded in his chest, not just from the nerves, but from the sheer intimidation of the place. The lobby was like something out of a luxury magazine, marble floors polished to a mirror shine, walls lined with gold-framed awards, and the faint smell of expensive cologne lingering in the air. Lawyers in tailored suits strode purposefully past him, their polished shoes clicking sharply against the marble, their conversations brisk and confident. Daniel adjusted his thrift store suit jacket, a little too big on his slim frame, and tried to straighten the second-hand tie he had borrowed from his cousin. He felt out of place, like a street kid who had wandered into a royal palace. The receptionist, a perfectly groomed woman with an icy smile, looked up from her computer. "You must be the new summer intern," she said with polite indifference. Daniel nodded nervously. "Yes, Daniel Carter, Mr. Graves is expecting you," she replied, pressing a button on her desk phone. "Alexander, your intern is here." The way she said intern made Daniel's stomach twist. Moments later, a tall man emerged from behind the frosted glass doors. Alexander Graves, the legend himself. His presence was almost cinematic. Perfectly combed dark hair, an immaculate navy suit that hugged his athletic frame, and a silver Rolex that caught the light with every movement. His piercing blue eyes scanned Daniel briefly, and then he looked down at his phone. Daniel's throat went dry. This was the man he had dreamed of working under, a man whose name was synonymous with winning impossible cases, with courtroom dominance. But instead of a handshake, Alexander simply muttered, "Intern." His tone was flat, uninterested. "Yes, sir," Daniel replied quickly, forcing a small smile. Alexander barely looked at him, right? "Just stay out of my way." And with that, he turned, walking back toward his office without another word. Daniel hesitated for a second, unsure whether to follow, but the receptionist gave him a quick nod toward Alexander's retreating figure. As they moved through the glass-walled corridors, Daniel caught glimpses of the bustling offices, associates flipping through thick case files, paralegals on urgent phone calls, interns rushing with stacks of documents. The energy was electric. Inside Alexander's office, the opulence was almost overwhelming. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city skyline, and the mahogany desk was perfectly organized, not a single paper out of place. Behind him, shelves held rows of leather-bound legal volumes, awards, and framed photos of Alexander shaking hands with judges, politicians, and CEOs. Alexander sank into his leather chair, eyes still fixed on his phone. "Here's the deal, Carter," he said finally, his voice smooth but cold. "You'll run errands, get coffee, organize files. Don't speak unless I ask you something. Don't touch anything on my desk. And under no circumstances should you think you have anything to teach me. Understand?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." Alexander finally glanced up at him, studying him for a beat before smirking slightly. "Good. You'll last longer that way." It was only Daniel's first day, but already he could feel it. This wasn't going to be a mentorship. This was going to be survival. As he left the office to fetch Alexander's morning coffee, Daniel's hands tightened around the strap of his worn leather satchel. He had come here to learn, to prove himself. But it was clear that Alexander Graves saw him as nothing more than an errand boy. What Daniel didn't know was that one day, the balance of power between them would shift, and when it did, Alexander's fate would rest entirely in the hands of the intern he had just dismissed as worthless. Daniel's first week at Graves and Cole was a crash course in humiliation. From the moment he stepped into the office each morning, Alexander treated him less like a budding law student and more like a personal assistant, or worse, a servant. Coffee black. And don't take forever this time, Alexander would bark without looking up from his laptop. The first day Daniel tried to hand it to him politely, but Alexander didn't even acknowledge him. The cup sat on the desk until Alexander felt like drinking it, as though Daniel was invisible. It didn't stop there. One afternoon, Daniel was painstakingly organizing case files in alphabetical order when Alexander stormed into the room. "What are you doing? Organizing the Simmons case files, sir." "You asked me." Alexander snatched a folder from Daniel's hands and flipped it open. No. This is completely wrong. Do you even read instructions, Carter? Or are you just trying to waste my time?" Daniel's ears burned. He had followed the instructions exactly, but there was no point arguing. Alexander had a way of speaking that turned every disagreement into an assault on your competence. At lunch, while other interns gathered in the break room sharing notes, Daniel often sat alone, rereading case briefs in silence. Every now and then he would overhear Alexander laughing with other senior lawyers, telling stories about the clueless kid who couldn't even handle filing without messing it up. The words stung. One day, Daniel was delivering a set of legal documents to the courthouse when his phone buzzed. It was a text from Alexander. "Alexander, forgot to tell you. Pick up my dry cleaning. And don't wrinkle the suit. It's worth more than your tuition." Daniel stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling a rush of anger he quickly swallowed down. But perhaps the worst moment came during a client meeting. Daniel had been quietly taking notes in the corner when Alexander turned to him mid-sentence. "Carter, get us more water," he said. Then, in front of the client, he added with a smirk, "That's about the only thing he's good for right now." The client chuckled politely. Daniel forced a smile, but inside he felt something shift. He had come here eager to learn, eager to earn Alexander's respect. But the more Alexander pushed him down, the more something deep inside him began to harden. He started staying later at the office, long after Alexander had left, reading through every case file he could get his hands on, learning the firm's strategies, memorizing past trials. If Alexander wouldn't teach him, he would teach himself. What Daniel didn't know yet was that the very knowledge he was gathering in those quiet, late-night hours would soon become the weapon that would turn Alexander's world upside down. It was a rainy Tuesday morning when the buzz in the office shifted. Phones rang more often, associates whispered in corners, and even the normally composed senior partners seemed on edge. Daniel noticed it immediately. Something big was happening. By mid-morning, the door to Alexander's office slammed shut, blinds drawn. A few minutes later, the receptionist leaned over her desk and whispered to a passing paralegal, "It's the Prescott case." They finally signed the contract. Daniel's ears perked up. He had heard rumors. The Prescott case was no ordinary lawsuit. It was a corporate war, a battle between two multi-million-dollar companies over a breach of contract worth tens of millions. Winning this case wasn't just about money. It was about prestige, power, and headlines. And Graves and Cole had just been handed the defense. An hour later, Alexander emerged from his office with that signature confident smirk plastered on his face. He didn't walk. He prowled, as though the hallway was his personal runway. Lawyers and assistants swiveled in their chairs to watch him pass. "This is it," one junior associate muttered. "If he wins this, he's untouchable." Alexander gathered his hand-picked team in the conference room. Daniel, sitting quietly in the back, hoped to be included, even just to take notes. But as the meeting began, Alexander's eyes locked on him. "Carter, why are you here?" Daniel froze. "I thought I could." "You thought wrong," Alexander interrupted sharply. "Go get us coffee. The real work's about to start." A few chuckles rippled around the table. Daniel swallowed his humiliation and left, clutching the empty coffee tray. But as he passed by the open door, he caught fragments of the conversation inside. Jury's going to hate them. Breach clause buried. In Section 14, their lead witness has credibility issues. Find every loophole, every inconsistency, no matter how small. Daniel didn't have a law degree yet, but something in those words stuck with him. Something didn't sound airtight. That night, long after everyone had gone home, Daniel sat at his tiny intern desk with a stack of Prescott case files. He read until his eyes blurred, highlighting clauses, jotting down notes, cross-referencing details with other contracts. He didn't know it yet, but somewhere in those pages lay a crack in the foundation of the case, one that could make or break Alexander Graves's career, and Daniel was getting closer to finding it. From the very start, Alexander approached the Prescott case as if victory was inevitable. In his mind, this wasn't just a case, it was a show. He strutted into every strategy meeting with a flawless suit, a rehearsed smirk, and a confidence so thick you could choke on it. His team fed off that energy, nodding along to his every word, even when those words began to drift into dangerous territory. Daniel, sitting in the background most days, noticed the cracks forming before anyone else. The first sign came during a witness prep session. The witness, a nervous mid-level executive from the Prescott company, was clearly uncomfortable. He fumbled over dates, contradicted himself twice, and even admitted in passing that he hadn't personally read some of the critical contract clauses. Daniel's pen paused mid-note. This was bad. Very bad. Alexander, however, brushed it off. "Don't worry about it," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "The jury won't catch it." But Daniel had caught it, and so would the opposing counsel. The second sign came when Alexander insisted on centering his entire opening argument around a section of the contract that Daniel had already flagged as vulnerable. In fact, he had quietly highlighted it in 3 separate memos, but Alexander never read them. "You're overthinking it, Carter," Alexander scoffed when Daniel tried to bring it up one evening. "I've been doing this longer than you've been alive." And then came the disaster in court. It was supposed to be a simple procedural hearing, just a warm-up before the real trial. But Alexander, determined to flex his dominance, went too far. He pushed the judge on a technicality that wasn't fully in his favor, and the judge shut him down hard, even hinting that the defense might be leaning on shaky legal ground. Whispers spread through the gallery. Opposing counsel smirked, and for the first time, Alexander's perfect posture stiffened. Back at the office, the tension was palpable. Associates buried themselves in research. Paralegals double-checked every filing. The entire team felt the pressure building. But Daniel, he was watching something else. He saw how Alexander began snapping at his team more than usual. He saw the way his confidence was starting to falter, though he'd never admit it. And he noticed one more thing. Alexander still hadn't found the problem that Daniel had been staring at for days in the case files. It was getting worse. And Daniel knew it was only a matter of time before the cracks split wide open. The office was nearly empty when Daniel found it. It was a Friday night, and the rest of the firm had cleared out hours ago. Outside, the city was swallowed in darkness, the rain streaking down the tall glass windows in shimmering ribbons. Daniel sat at his desk, surrounded by towers of Prescott case files, a lukewarm cup of coffee beside him. He had been combing through the contract for what felt like the 100th time, his highlighter scratching faint yellow lines across the page. At first, it was just a hunch. Something about Section 14 never sat right with him. But now he was sure. Buried in the dense legal jargon, there it was. A single sentence, so bland and unassuming that anyone in a rush would skip right over it. But Daniel knew better. It was a loophole. And not just any loophole. It completely undermined the opposing side's entire claim. If used correctly, it could tear their argument apart in court. His pulse quickened. He double-checked it against the contract's earlier clauses, then against the correspondence between the companies. It all lined up. This wasn't just a minor point, it was the kill shot. Daniel leaned back in his chair, a mix of excitement and disbelief flooding through him. This was it. This was the moment he could finally prove to Alexander and to himself that he wasn't just a coffee boy. The next morning, he walked into the office with a folder clutched tightly under his arm. Alexander was already there, leaning back in his chair as he flipped through glossy pages of a golf magazine. "Morning, Carter," he said without looking up. "Grab me a coffee before we get started." Daniel ignored the sting of the remark. "Sir, I need to show you something. It's about the Prescott contract, Section 14, specifically." Alexander sighed, setting the magazine down with exaggerated slowness. "Carter, we've been through this. I know my case. I don't need a lecture from an intern. I'm serious, Daniel insisted, opening the folder and sliding the highlighted pages across the desk. If we present this clause in the right context, it destroys their argument. They can't prove breach because Alexander held up a hand or stop. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but trust me, I've got this covered. But sir, that's enough. Carter, Alexander's tone sharpened. Do your job and let me do mine. Now, coffee. Black. Daniel stood there for a moment, the folder still open on the desk between them. His heart sank. He had just handed Alexander the very thing that could save the case, and the man couldn't even be bothered to read it. But Daniel wasn't angry, not yet. He was patient, and in the quiet recesses of his mind, a thought began to form. If Alexander wouldn't listen now, then maybe, just maybe, Daniel would save this card for the moment Alexander needed it most. The tension in the office was thick enough to cut with a knife. Trial prep had consumed every waking moment, and Alexander's usual arrogance had taken on a sharper, more desperate edge. Daniel kept his head down, quietly doing the grunt work, but he never stopped thinking about Section 14. Every late night spent reviewing the opposing side's filings only confirmed what he already knew. They were building their entire case on a foundation that was about to collapse. If someone pointed it out, 3 days before trial, Daniel decided he couldn't wait any longer. Alexander was in the conference room, standing over a table covered in legal pads, binders, and a half-eaten salad. Two associates flanked him, typing furiously as he dictated bullet points for his opening statement. Daniel stepped in cautiously, folder in hand. Sir, I need just 5 minutes to go over something with you. Alexander didn't even glance up. Make it quick, Carter. We're kind of busy saving the case you're not working on. Daniel took a deep breath. It's Section 14. I've been through every document, every communication, every revision. If we raise it, their breach claim collapses. They can't prove damages without. Alexander finally looked at him, and his expression was the legal equivalent of a death sentence. Carter, let me make this clear for you. His voice was low, deliberate, and condescending. I have argued hundreds of cases. I've beaten some of the best attorneys in the country. I've won battles you couldn't even comprehend. And you're an intern. Do you really think you've found something I've missed? Daniel hesitated, but nodded. Yes, sir. The room went silent for a moment. One associate smirked and shook his head. Alexander stepped closer until they were just a foot apart. That's cute, he said, his tone dripping with mockery. Now go fetch those updated exhibits from the copy room and leave the lawyering to the professionals. Daniel's stomach twisted. He turned to leave, gripping the folder so tightly his knuckles went white. As he stepped out, he heard Alexander chuckle to the associates. The kid's got spirit. Shame it's completely useless. The humiliation burned hotter than ever before. But this time, something shifted inside Daniel. He wasn't just angry. He was done. He had tried to help. He had given Alexander every chance to take the lifeline. And now, if Alexander wanted to drown in his own arrogance, Daniel would let him. Because when the time came, Daniel would decide whether to throw him a rope or watch him sink. The courthouse buzzed with anticipation that morning. Lawyers in crisp suits clustered in the hallways, flipping through last-minute notes, their voices low but urgent. The air smelled faintly of fresh coffee and nervous sweat. Daniel stood just inside the main entrance, clutching a legal pad and trying to steady his breathing. He wasn't even supposed to be here. Alexander had made it clear that his role today was to watch and learn. But Daniel had insisted on coming, telling himself it was for the experience. In truth, he wanted to see exactly how this played out. When Alexander arrived, the difference in their demeanors was stark. He strode through the doors like a conquering general, flashing a confident smile at the reporters who had gathered outside. Cameras clicked and questions flew. Mr. Graves, what's your strategy for today? Do you think your client has a strong chance? Alexander didn't answer. He didn't need to. His smirk said it all. Of course I'll win. Inside the courtroom, the judge presided from the bench, shuffling through papers. The opposing counsel, a sharp-eyed woman with a reputation for dismantling egos, sat poised at her table. She glanced at Alexander with a small, knowing smile. The trial began. Alexander's opening statement was pure theater. His voice rose and fell at just the right moments, his gestures confident, his gaze sweeping across the jury. He painted his client as the victim of an overzealous, opportunistic company. The jurors listened, some nodding along. It was vintage Alexander Graves, but Daniel noticed the cracks almost immediately. When the opposing counsel stood to present her opening, her delivery was calm, precise, and devastating. She laid out the alleged breach in clear, simple terms, her evidence already neatly packaged. Her voice dripped with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing you have the stronger hand. And then came the witnesses. The very same mid-level executive Daniel had watched fumble during prep took the stand, and fumbled again. Dates blurred. Details contradicted earlier statements. At one point, the witness even admitted that certain parts of the contract weren't really my area. Daniel's stomach sank. He knew what was coming next. Opposing counsel pounced, hammering the inconsistencies until the witness looked like a deer in headlights. The jury's expressions shifted. The judge scribbled notes. By midday, Daniel could see it. Alexander's swagger was slipping. He leaned in more during testimony. His notes became messier, and his objections, once sharp and confident, started sounding defensive. The moment of truth was closing in. The entire case was teetering, and Alexander didn't even realize the trap was about to snap shut. And Daniel? He was sitting there, Section 14 fresh in his mind, knowing he held the key that could stop the bleeding, if he chose to use it. By the second afternoon of the trial, the tension in the courtroom was suffocating. Alexander sat stiffly at the defense table, jaw tight, tapping his pen against his legal pad in a rhythm that betrayed his growing panic. The opposing counsel had been relentless, dismantling his witnesses, punching holes in his arguments, and presenting evidence that, to anyone watching, seemed devastating. Daniel, sitting just behind him in the gallery, could feel the shift in the room. The jury no longer looked captivated by Alexander's speeches. They looked skeptical. Worse, they looked convinced. Then came the moment Daniel had been waiting for. The opposing counsel brought up Section 14. She read it aloud with calculated precision, twisting its language to fit her narrative. Daniel's heart pounded. She was so close, but she was also wrong. She had left herself exposed, just like Daniel had predicted weeks ago. But Alexander didn't notice. In fact, he was preparing to respond in exactly the way she wanted him to, the same overconfident rebuttal. He had rehearsed, the one that played straight into her hands. Daniel's pulse raced. If Alexander went down this path, it would be the final nail in the coffin. He leaned forward, whispering urgently, "Sir, it's the loophole. The damages clause. She's misrepresenting it. Use the second subparagraph, page 72. Alexander barely turned his head. "Not now, Carter," he hissed. Daniel clenched his jaw. This was it, the exact scenario he had warned about. And Alexander was about to blow it out of sheer arrogance. The opposing counsel smirked, clearly sensing victory. Something in Daniel snapped. He stood abruptly, folder in hand. "Your Honor," he said, his voice clear and steady. "If I may, there's a critical clarification in the contract that directly addresses counsel's point." The courtroom froze. All eyes turned to the young intern who had just interrupted the proceedings. The judge raised an eyebrow. "And you are?" "Daniel Carter, intern for the defense," he said, stepping forward. "With the court's permission, I'd like to direct Mr. Graves to a clause that will resolve this issue immediately." The opposing counsel objected instantly, but the judge held up a hand. "I'll allow it, Dotmer." Graves Alexander's face was a storm of emotions, shock, irritation, and something else, fear. But with no choice, he took the folder Daniel handed him. As he scanned the highlighted section, his eyes widened. It was all there. The loophole. The language that destroyed the plaintiff's damages claim in one clean stroke. Alexander rose slowly, turning to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, let me read to you exactly what the contract says." He walked them through Daniel's discovery, explaining in plain terms how the clause nullified the opposing side's key argument. It was concise, irrefutable, and devastating. By the time he finished, the jury's faces had shifted once again, not skeptical, but intrigued. Some even looked impressed. The opposing counsel scrambled to recover, but the damage was done. Her timeline, her logic, her foundation, all shattered by a single overlooked paragraph. And Daniel? He sat back down, calm but burning with satisfaction. He had just saved Alexander's career, and Alexander knew it. The courtroom adjourned for the day, but the buzz in the air lingered like static. Reporters whispered excitedly in the hallway, already rewriting their headlines. The Prescott case had taken a sharp and very public turn, and everyone knew it. Alexander stepped out of the double doors with his usual confident stride, but it wasn't the same swagger he'd carried in that morning. This time, it was controlled, calculated, and if you looked closely enough, you could see something in his eyes, the faint shadow of gratitude mixed with the bitter taste of humility. Daniel followed a few paces behind, his legal pad tucked under his arm. He wasn't expecting thanks, not from Alexander. The man had made it abundantly clear over the past few weeks what he thought of the coffee boy. But when the reporters descended on them, the moment Daniel never expected arrived. "Mr. Graves," one journalist called out, microphone extended. That was a stunning turnaround. What happened in there? What changed the momentum? Alexander hesitated. For a second, Daniel thought he would brush it off with a vague, self-congratulatory answer. But then, he stepped slightly aside, motioning toward Daniel. "You can thank my intern for that," he said, his voice steady. He caught something in the contract that even I overlooked. It made all the difference. Daniel froze, unsure he'd heard correctly. Around them, cameras clicked, microphones were shoved forward, and murmurs rippled through the crowd. An intern, outsmarting a senior partner. It was the kind of story that spread like wildfire in legal circles. Alexander didn't look at Daniel as they continued walking, but his voice was quieter now, almost grudgingly sincere. "You've got good instincts, Carter. Don't waste them." It wasn't exactly an apology. It wasn't even warm. But coming from Alexander Graves, it was the closest thing to bending the knee. Later that night, as Daniel packed up his desk, a few associates stopped by to shake his hand. One even muttered, "You just did the impossible." He never gives anyone credit. Daniel smiled faintly. He wasn't after credit. Not really. What he wanted, what he needed, was to prove that he belonged here. And today, he had. But as he left the office, the city lights glowing in the rain, he couldn't shake one thought. Alexander Graves owed him everything. And deep down, Daniel suspected the man would never truly admit it. The Prescott trial ended 3 days later with a verdict in favor of the defense. When the judge read the decision, the courtroom was silent for a heartbeat, and then the defense table erupted in quiet celebration. Associates patted Alexander on the back, their relief visible. The opposing counsel masked her disappointment with a professional nod, but Daniel caught the flash of frustration in her eyes. For Alexander, it was another notch on his belt, another headline to add to his collection of victories. But for Daniel, it was something more. He had been underestimated, humiliated, and treated as if he didn't exist. And yet, when the moment came, it was his voice, his persistence, his discovery that saved the day. He had played the long game and won. Alexander shook his hand at the courthouse steps for the benefit of the cameras. "Good work, Carter," he said, his smile as polished as his shoes. But Daniel knew the truth. That handshake wasn't just a thank you, it was an acknowledgement. A quiet, grudging surrender from a man who prided himself on never bowing to anyone. In the weeks that followed, whispers spread through the firm. The arrogant senior partner, saved by the intern. The coffee boy who spotted what no one else did. Some said it was luck. Others knew better. Daniel never gloated. He didn't have to. Every time Alexander passed him in the hallway, every time his tone was a fraction softer, every time he hesitated before dismissing him, Daniel felt the quiet satisfaction of justice. Because sometimes, revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's not about seeing the other person fall. Sometimes it's about watching them live every day knowing they owe you everything and can never quite repay it. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this: never underestimate the quiet ones. The ones you overlook might be the very people holding the key to your survival. And if you enjoyed this story as much as I enjoyed telling it, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because the next story I have for you will make you question everything you think you know about loyalty, betrayal, and payback. After all, sometimes karma doesn't knock. Sometimes it sits quietly in the back of the room, waiting for the perfect moment to speak.